our introduction to Renova and Natlan, we got our first look at a shade of the Primordial One. But this wasn't the first shade we'd heard of. The first shade, in fact, was introduced to us all the way back in Mondstadt at the very beginning of our journey into Vat. I am, of course, speaking of Istaroth, the Shade of Time. Istaroth appears all over Teyvat, seemingly at the strangest of times, before disappearing once more without any acknowledgement, slipping away from the people and gods of this world, not unlike how time slips away from us all. But who is the god of time? What is her ultimate goal in Teyvat? What is her relationship with Venti? And could Istaroth of the Thousand Winds, god of moments, be dead? The best place to start to answer these questions is, of course, at the beginning, and Istaroth has so many beginnings for us to choose from, so let's get into it. We know Istaroth is a shade of the Primordial One, specifically the Shade of Time. We also know that when we compare Istaroth's actions with Renova, Istaroth seems to care more for humanity than the other shades. Or at least the shades we know of, as the other two shades have only sparse mentions so far in the story. Something I expect will be changing very soon, but that's a theory for another day. But what has Istaroth done for humanity? For that question, we're going to need to look at two nations in specific, Inazuma and Mondstadt. Starting with Inazuma, we actually have to start with the civilization that existed before Inazuma. This, of course, being Enkanomiya. In the Age of Darkness, many in Enkanomiya died. They were attacked by the Vishops that prowled the depths, and they prayed desperately for Celestia to come to their aid. But for years, their prayers fell on deaf ears. That is, until Istaroth arrived. Presumably, Istaroth could no longer stand the suffering of the people. Or perhaps Abaraku offered Istaroth something she couldn't refuse. Either way, Istaroth bestowed Abaraku with the knowledge needed to build a machine which could banish the darkness, the Dainichi no Mikoshi. From here, Istaroth appears to have been worshipped in Enkanomiya for some time, before eventually her worship was more or less hijacked by the nobility, who perverted her gift in an attempt to gain power. With that, as Istaroth so often does, she seemingly faded away from history, without the notice of others. However, this is not where Istaroth's stories ends. In fact, in Inazuma, two other gods who were born of divine lightning seem to hold dominion over the same aspect as the Shade of the Primordial One. Makoto, god of transience, and A, god of eternity. Makoto would end up sacrificing herself for Inazuma during the Cataclysm, but in the process appears to have borrowed power from Istaroth to plant the seed of the sacred Sakura tree thousands of years in the past, meeting once more with her sister in the present. Why Istaroth helped Makoto is unknown, but A acknowledges without the sacred Sakura, she would have been overrun during the Cataclysm. In this sense, Istaroth was instrumental in saving Inazuma. It is also very likely the statue of the omnipresent god in Inazuma that is a reference to Istaroth. This is a piece that I'm going to come back to later, so let's put a pin in it for now, and instead turn our attention to the Nation of Wind and Song. Mondstadt was a very different place before the end of the Archon War. Many civilizations in the area would rise and fall at the whims of Celestia, and at the greed and misunderstanding of the gods of the realm. When the people of Old Mondstadt became trapped inside the storm barrier, a small sprite was born, a wisp of the Thousand Winds. This little sprite would have become known as Barbatos. Though his power was limited, he did have the ability to leave the storm barrier, and he communed with humanity both inside and outside the storm barrier. He wished to help them gain their freedom, but as mentioned, he had very little power. The Gunhildr clan who had escaped the storm barrier were freezing to death in the many snowstorms and blizzards kicked up by Andrias and Decorabian. They prayed and prayed, and even though Barbatos heard their prayers, there was little he could do. And yet, somehow, Barbatos seems to, almost in the span of one moment, gain the power to terraform a small portion of Mondstadt, allowing the Gunhildr clan to build a small settlement and even help the Gunhildr clan begin the production of cider. This is where my first speculation comes into play. The Thousand Winds Temple was erected sometime before this, and the god of time in Mondstadt would end up being worshipped alongside Barbatos, though eventually Istaroth would become the nameless god of the temple, and Barbatos assumed the domain of time in his worship, Istaroth being all but forgotten by Mondstadters. I believe Barbatos, in an effort to protect the Gunhildr clan and help those still trapped within the storm barrier, visited Istaroth, asking her for some of her power so that he could help the people of Mondstadt. I believe there are two possibilities for Barbatos and his relationship with Istaroth. One is that Barbatos is something similar to Nahida and Greater Lord Rukkhadevata. Barbatos is a branch, a split of power from Istaroth that the Shade of Time created. For what purpose? Well, Barbatos could be her eyes into the future. This theory makes sense when we think that Barbatos has a tendency to go to sleep often throughout Mondstadt's history, only waking up during climactic and history-shaping events. Barbatos is also said to know every song that has ever been or ever will be written, another connection between him and time. Moreover, Barbatos in the Ars Goetia is a demon that is said to possess powers over time as well. If Barbatos was an incarnation of sorts for Istaroth, then this connection would make sense. However, with the introduction of Natlan, I believe there's a far more interesting theory to be found. In the same way Xbalanque, the first Pyro Archon, bargained for Renova's power, I believe Barbatos did the same. In this sense, Barbatos is beholden to whatever deal he struck with Istaroth, but in exchange gained the power he needed to protect Mondstadt and free its people. This deal could also be why Barbatos cannot take a direct role in the governing of Mondstadt. While Barbatos is the god of freedom, in his capacity as a god of time, he must be an indirect force of influence in Mondstadt, and perhaps even in Teyvat. He could offer advice and counsel, but ultimately it's up to the people of Mondstadt to move themselves through time. But why would Istaroth make a deal with Barbatos? We know from the conversation between Renova and Xbalanque that if Celestia ever found out that the Shades were lending their power to inhabitants in Teyvat, there would be major consequences. Renova all but states that she'll call Xbalanque a thief, and he would have to endure the punishment of Celestia should he be caught. Surely this isn't something that would be restricted to just the Shade of Death. I believe Istaroth has been planting the seeds across time that have been slowly driving the world of Teyvat to break free from Celestia and change their fate. Istaroth, time and time again, has intervened on behalf of humans and gods in Teyvat. Prophecies laid strewn about the land of Teyvat, one even hearkening the rebirth of the dragon of Hydro. While this is pure speculation on my part, it would make sense if these prophecies were left behind by Istaroth as a subtle way to guide the people of Teyvat. If Barbatos was given some of Istaroth's power, then he is forever tied up in her plan, whatever plan that may be. It would also make sense then that Barbatos would say he's the weakest of the Archons. His strength likely doesn't lay in combat, but perhaps in the same way the Sacred Sakura was able to aid A in her defense of Inazuma, Barbatos is able to use the same power he gained from Istaroth to aid other living beings in a similar way. Now, we might be wondering, where is Istaroth? Why does she so often fade from worship, washed away by the same thing she should hold power over? I believe Istaroth is, in a sense, dead. Now, I know you guys might be thinking, Kara, now you're stepping into crack theory territory. And you're right, this piece of my theory is a little bit more out there, but just hear me out. Remember how I mentioned the omnipresent god? I believe Istaroth has given up her ability to live one life, stationary through time, and instead has divided herself into moments that exist throughout time. In this sense, Istaroth is everywhere, but at the same time, nowhere. By trapping herself inside these moments, both in the past and in the future, as time continues, she will be able to escape the watch of Celestia, but also enact her plan. I believe that Barbatos is one of these moments, and this is why Barbatos only awakens during specific parts of Mondstadt's history, and this could also be why he travels to Vat more than any other Archon. Barbatos, in many ways, is preparing the ground, so to speak, for whatever plan Istaroth has put into motion. Whether Barbatos became one of her moments as a part of a deal he might have struck to gain more power, or if he was always meant to be her incarnation into that, it's clear that Barbatos and Istaroth are inexplicably linked. How this story will unfold, only time may tell, but the wind will surely record and share its story for all to observe. Okay everyone, I wanted to create an updated video on my thoughts on Venti and Istaroth. I know that there's tons of these videos out there, so if you guys are interested in more Venti and Barbatos theories, this one actually laid the groundwork for a lot of other theories I have regarding Barbatos, so let me know if you're interested. Like, comment, subscribe, share with a friend, anything to make me feel like I'm not screaming into the void. As a reminder, if you want to have your name in the credits of my videos and streams, you can join my $1 tier on my Ko-Fi membership page. And with that, may the wind bless your travels.